How long has it been since I was here? Luther thought to himself on his way to his hometown. The last time the man had come here was a year ago when he buried his father. His father had been his only relative. Luther's mother had passed away from a severe illness when he was still a teenager, and his father had raised his son alone as best as he could. He never remarried. He couldn't betray the memory of the woman he loved, and for that his son deeply respected him. Now he was gone too. Age spares no one, and sooner or later it takes what it wants. Luther's father lived longer than his mother and managed to raise his son, and for that he never stopped being thankful to fate. Luther missed his father very much, who, having given up the urban comfort that his son could have provided, spent his remaining days in a small village house. "Dad, why don't you want to move?" Luther would ask every time he visited his father. This happened very rarely, something the man regretted when his father left this world. Only after that did he realize he spent too little time with him. The big city had drawn him in. First studies, then work, business. He needed to achieve a lot. Luther had no time for sentimentality, and he only looked back when he was almost 40. Life was almost lived, and there wasn't a single soul nearby. Parents in the grave, no wife, and he hadn't become a father, though he could have. What is the meaning of life? This question Luther asked himself quite often and found no answer. His father couldn't leave the village because he wanted to be closer to his mother. That's what he would say. "How can I live without my beloved wife? I go to her grave every day. We talk soul to soul as we did when she was still alive. It seems like that was so long ago that I shouldn't even remember it. But I keep her memory my whole life. And I will keep it until the end of my days." Luther respected his father's feelings, while he often scolded himself for rarely visiting his mother. After leaving his childhood home at 18, he didn't return even once for the first few years. "I thought you had forgotten about me," his father said when he finally managed to hug his son. "Thank you for at least letting me know you were okay sometimes. You are my only one in the whole wide world. I'm lonely and I'm not young anymore, and I'm so glad you managed to find your place in life that I can't even describe it with words." Luther always studied well and aspired for more. Unlike many of his peers who sat in bars and drank alcohol after school, he understood the importance of higher education. Only with a good diploma could one escape the poverty that surrounded Luther from birth. No, he never blamed his parents for not being able to provide him a decent existence. His father did everything he could to ensure his son always had good food and clothes. But for Luther, that was not enough. Looking at the local drunk men, he horrifiedly imagined that if he didn't get into university, a similar future awaited him. And what else can a person do if they can't realize themselves in life? Just drink and complain about fate. Luther couldn't allow that. He could always hit rock bottom later. For now, he needed to do everything possible to make sure that it never happened. The fear of the future was so strong that Luther threw all his efforts into studying, which helped him get into university. His father was immensely happy when he learned that his son would study in the big city. "Well done," he exclaimed proudly. "You'll be the first person in our family to have a higher education. That's admirable." Luther himself also felt very proud of himself. At one point he even caught himself starting to get cocky, but he quickly put a stop to it. He was not one of those people who achieved success for the sake of a crown on their head. It was important for Luther to provide himself and his future children a decent standard of living. He wanted only one thing: not to survive like his parents, not to drag the yoke of poverty, and he succeeded in that. After work, a business followed, and here he was, an adult, respectable man living in a good apartment and driving an expensive car. It seemed like there was nothing more to wish for. But sometimes the man felt sadness and anxiety. For all those years he dedicated to work, he didn't manage to start a family and have those very heirs for whom he could provide the kind of life he had always dreamed of. Loneliness awaited him ahead, and he could only spend his capital on mistresses because nobody else, except for long-legged and money-hungry girls, needed him. How did the house fall into disrepair in just 1 year? The man thought to himself, stopping near his father's house. Hearing the sound of an approaching car, the neighbors came out to look at the city tycoon. It wasn't every day that such a person came to the village. Luther was the only one from this village who had achieved so much in life. There were some locals who had left to work in the city in their youth, but they still didn't live very well. Of course it was better than in the village, but nobody was swimming in luxury. Some still rented a small room, while others paid a huge mortgage for an apartment. Everyone had their own fate. But how could you not envy such a city dandy? Luther, unlike many, was not burdened by debt, lived freely and did as he pleased. How could you not pay attention to him? The neighbors whispered behind his back, even when his father was still alive and Luther came to visit him. Raised an oligarch, they would ask his father sarcastically in the village, "He probably gives you a lot of money. You shouldn't be so greedy and share with others. Not everyone lives so well. You should be kinder." His father didn't take a single cent from his son. The man's pension was enough for him to live on. But how could he explain this to the neighbors? And was it worth it? He was a very unsociable person, almost didn't communicate with anyone. When Luther left for the city, he didn't even leave the house every day. He didn't want to discuss his only son's life with strangers at all. Luther really wanted to know what had happened to his father's house and wasn't embarrassed to ask Mrs. Langley, who loved gossiping about him the most. "You should have come later." Mrs. Langley laughed when she heard his question. "You've been gallivanting around your city for a whole year, and now you suddenly remembered about the house? This isn't the capital, you know. A village house needs maintenance. Did your late father teach you nothing?" And indeed, his father had never involved him in such matters. Luther hadn't asked either. Physical labor wasn't for him. He would rather read another book than figure out the intricacies of village work. It was completely uninteresting to him, and he didn't need it. He didn't plan to live in the village his whole life, and in the city such problems didn't exist. "Somehow I never got along with village life," Luther replied, already regretting getting into this completely meaningless conversation. "I always had my own things to do." "Okay, thank you, Mrs. Langley. If you don't know anything about the house, then I'll go figure it out myself." "What did you come here for, Luther?" Mrs. Langley asked. "Not for the inheritance, surely? Don't you have enough money?" "No, Mrs. Langley, not for the inheritance," Luther said. "I want to tear down my father's house. There's almost nothing left, just boards and a foundation, and I want to build a decent house on this spot. That's why I came." "What do you need that for?" Mrs. Langley asked. "You don't have children or a family. Who are you planning to bring here? Even if you had a family and children, people like you usually travel to resorts." Luther hated conversations like this. Mrs. Langley herself had never been known for her family life, so what business did she have judging others? She lived with her sister, and when her sister died, she was left alone, living quietly. What could such a person possibly care about someone else's family? Luther, of course, said nothing out loud, but politely said goodbye again and went to his house. As he entered the house, he felt a terrible smell of dampness. "Yeah," he thought to himself. "I should have come 6 months ago when my father passed away and taken care of this right away. But I didn't have time." The house was cold, and strange noises came from all the cracks. Who could it be? Luther thought about starting to sort through his father's old things, which he wanted to take with him as a keepsake. After all, his father had treasured them throughout his life. He couldn't throw them away. It was such an important memory of his father. But when he approached the stairs leading to the basement, he heard real human voices. "Help! Someone! Please help! Save us!" Judging by the voice, it was a teenager, 14 or 15 years old, and he was definitely not alone. A few seconds later, a second voice was heard. "Don't shout, Roby. No one will help us. No one will hear us here. The house is abandoned. No one has come here for over a year since the owner died, so there's no hope. Lean on me. Let's get out of here." Wow, Luther thought to himself, and quickly jumped down. The stairs had rotted away, and Luther was surprised he was able to jump from such a height into the basement. Seeing the man approaching them, the boys were overjoyed. "Hurray, Roby, we're saved," exclaimed the teenager. "Now we'll get out of here." "What happened?" Luther asked sternly. "How did you end up here?" The boys didn't know what to say. They were ashamed to admit that they had been coming to the abandoned house for a year, skipping school or just causing trouble. They were afraid of offending the man, realizing he was the son of the house's owner. The boys were mischievous, but also clever, so they remained silent. "Okay," Luther said, "we'll figure it out later. Give me your hand," he said to the teenager. "You take Roby?" the boy replied. "A beam fell on him. It must have been completely rotten. I barely managed to lift it off him. And I'll get out myself. We usually enter from the yard." Luther was surprised to see that his father had made a secret exit from the basement to the street. He hadn't known about it before. The man picked up Roby and carried him towards the exit the boy had pointed out. Climbing up to the house without stairs would have been problematic. When they reached the backyard, the teenager, who still hadn't introduced himself, said seriously, "We need to go home or my mum will worry. Roby only has his grandmother, and she'll scold us severely if she finds out what happened, so he needs to leave without her noticing his limp." Luther looked closely at the boy's face, which was lying on his arms, and couldn't believe his eyes. "How much you resemble me," he thought, but immediately dismissed the thought. This can't be, he thought, but looking at the boy, who was identical to him in his youth, he realized he was mistaken, and it was possible. Luther had never had a serious relationship with Marion, the daughter of Mrs. Manny. While living in the village, they shared common problems. Marion was raised by her mother alone, and Luther by his father. There was a time when they dreamed of their parents getting married and living together as a big, happy family, but that was in the distant past. They were just little kids, and loved to fantasize. Only their dreams had nothing to do with reality. Luther left, and Marion stayed in the village, although she always dreamed of something more. "Why don't you want to go to the city to study?" Luther asked. "Maybe you'll leave and start a life you never even dreamed of." "Who will I leave my mother with?" Marion replied. "She's all alone. And it's not just that. You know how I've been studying all these years. I don't have the brains to get into a university. And I don't want to just live in the city. I'd rather stay here. I have a job here. I'll make do." But the years went by, and the life that Marion hated for its poverty and hopelessness remained the same. She may have dreamed of escaping, but she no longer had the strength. With each passing year, her prospects dwindled. She worked, earned money, but it was barely enough for food and modest clothing. And then, several years later, Luther returned. The first time, immediately after graduating from university, she didn't pay much attention to it and didn't even bother to meet him. And to be honest, he didn't need it either. He barely had time to talk to his father, whom he hadn't seen since he left to try his luck in the big city. But fate gave them another chance, and several years later, when Luther came to visit his father again, he decided to meet Marian. Word by word, they found themselves in the old abandoned house. "I love you," Luther suddenly confessed. "Come with me to the city. My life isn't settled yet, but I'll achieve everything. I promised myself." In response, Marian just laughed. She had never considered her relationship with Luther romantic. Friendship, yes, maybe a youthful sympathy that was a long time ago, but no more. And at that moment she was drawn to him like a magnet, and she couldn't resist herself. "There aren't even any hotels in this village." Luther chuckled when everything had already happened. "Nightmare. This is real extreme, nothing to say. I've never had anything like this before." "Me neither," Marian replied, who had only met with Ollie, a local guy, before. But they could openly show their relationship because he was from the village, but Luther was different. Marian didn't want to advertise her relationship with him at all. "They'll start spreading rumors," she thought to herself. "My mother won't survive this." After walking the girl home, Luther asked again, "So, maybe you'll come with me after all? There's little time to think. I'm leaving tomorrow. I have to get back to work. I don't know when I'll come back next time. Maybe in a few months, maybe in a few years. So think now." "I don't need you," Marian smiled. "You have plenty of fans there, I'm sure. You're a handsome guy, and smart and promising. I'll just be a burden to you." "Well, as you wish," Luther replied. "I won't persuade you. Then goodbye, and don't hold a grudge against me. Maybe we'll meet again someday." And what was she afraid of then? She couldn't understand herself. She had dreamed of a happy, prosperous life, and she loved Luther, although she was afraid to admit it to herself. But even when she found out she was pregnant, she didn't dare contact him to tell him about it. "Foolish Marian." "Mrs. Manny said, you let such a guy slip away. And you two could have made it work. He may have left for the city, but in his heart he remained our kind and sincere person, honest, decent, and fair. I'll tell his father about the baby, and Luther will come for you. You'll get married and live happily." "Mum, don't you dare," Marian exclaimed. "You'll never see me or your grandson again. Do you understand? I forbid you. Don't dare tell anyone who Roby's father is. I don't want it to look like I got pregnant by a city boy for a better life. And who knows? They're all good at talking. But I'm more than sure he didn't plan to marry me. They're all like that. Ollie ran away to the neighboring village too. Life is a little better there, and he didn't even remember me." "But you have no right to deprive your son of his father." "Mrs. Manny tried to convince Marian. "You must tell Luther everything." But Marian refused, and Mrs. Manny gave her daughter her word that no one would find out who Roby's father was, and she kept it. What else could she do? It was Marian's life, and she had no right to interfere. She could only help her daughter, and she had been helping her for many years, since Roby was 4 years old, and Marian, tired of living in poverty, left for the city. Since then, Mrs. Manny had been raising her grandson alone. At first, Marian still sent money, but after a few years she announced, "I'm getting married. The man is good, wealthy. But I told him I don't have any children, which means there shouldn't be any. I hope you understand what I'm saying." I also told him I'm an orphan. I don't remember my parents. No need for him to know I'm from a poor family. I don't want that. I'm waiting for a prosperous life. I'll send money for Roby if I can, but if not, don't judge me harshly. I didn't expect to get pregnant, but that's how it turned out. Now I want to build my life, and I think I deserve it." Luther was shocked when he heard the truth. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" he asked, looking into Mrs. Manny's eyes. "And my father, it turns out, knew everything too, and didn't tell me anything. How could that be?" "No, Luther, you misunderstood," Mrs. Manny sighed. "Your father didn't know anything. I gave Marian my word not to tell anyone anything. How could I? Of course he suspected when he saw Roby. I'm sure he suspected. But I never told him openly. He asked once who the boy's father was and where he was, and I told him it was Ollie. And he had left the village for good. You rarely came to visit. Here is the translation. He didn't tell you anything? And you've never seen Roby because you didn't have time for that. But now you know everything. I can't keep silent anymore. A boy needs a father. I'm not coping with him. He's a rare scamp. He doesn't listen to anyone. Since you came and asked for an open conversation, I decided that I don't have the right to keep silent anymore. Marian will never come back here anyway. She doesn't need a son, and she's long forgotten about me. But this way, at least you'll be with Roby. Maybe he'll start listening to you." Luther had no doubts. That same day, the man decided to take the boy with him to the city. "Just talk to him carefully," said Mrs. Manny. "After all, you're a stranger to him. I know you're his real father, but he doesn't know that." "Of course I understand everything," said Luther. "I'll talk to him correctly and explain everything." The conversation turned out to be difficult. Roby didn't understand why he had to go to some city with a stranger when there was so much interesting stuff in the village. "But do you want to be rich and successful in the future?" asked Luther. "Or do you want to count every cent and live in poverty for the rest of your life?" The man was hitting the sore spot, and he knew it. Mrs. Manny had already complained about the lack of money. They lived so modestly with Roby that sometimes the woman couldn't even buy the boy good clothes. From time to time they had limited means for food. They only bought the most necessary things, which greatly annoyed Roby. The teenager even seriously thought about starting to steal, but so far he hadn't dared to take such a desperate step. "Of course I want to," he replied. "Who doesn't want to be rich, happy, and successful? But how when there's only poverty and poverty around?" Roby was clearly not a fool, and Luther understood that. With great difficulty, but the man still managed to motivate the teenager and persuade him to go with him, at least for a short time. "To live well, you need to work," Luther explained to his son. "That's how I do it. I've worked my whole life, and that's why I live well. Do you understand?" Already after a month, Roby called Luther Dad. The boy became so strongly attached to the man that he could no longer imagine his life without his participation. And after 2 months, Luther confessed to the teenager that he was his real father. "How did that happen?" Roby asked, confused. "And where's Mom?" The teenager didn't even remember that he once had a mother. Very vaguely in his consciousness, distant memories sometimes surfaced about the fact that once, together with him and his grandmother, a woman lived whom he called Mum. But it was too long ago, and it seemed like a complete lie. Luther didn't know what to answer his son, how to explain that his mother had abandoned him in childhood. The man couldn't bring himself to tell Roby the whole truth about Marian, and he, as if understanding this, changed the subject to his grandmother. "Dad, why didn't we take her with us?" Roby asked. "She's all alone there, and I would really like it if Grandma lived with us. I miss her so much." "You're right," Luther replied thoughtfully. "How did I not think of this before?" "Sorry, son. I'll call Mrs. Manny today and invite her to live with us, and if she agrees, I'll go pick her up in a few days." Of course, the woman agreed. Living in the village alone was very difficult, and she missed Roby dearly. How he's changed, she marveled, watching her grandson come home from school and diligently do his homework and read books. I just can't get enough of him. Sometime after everything had settled down, fate gave Luther another gift. Stopping by a restaurant for lunch, he accidentally ran into Marion. The man immediately recognized her, and even after all these years, he wouldn't have mistaken her for anyone else. The woman was dressed all in black, sitting alone at a table, sipping a cocktail from a glass. "I'm a widow now, Luther," she whispered. "It's been a month already." This meeting was truly fateful for her as well. She had spent many years with a good but unloved man who was much older than her. And now he was gone, and she was left all alone. How much they needed to say to each other. But they were able to find the right words. Luther's beloved woman, whom he had never been able to forget all these years, returned to him, to her mother, her daughter, and Roby got a mother, and a year later, a brother Tim. How much they all lacked simple family happiness, which fate had given them only after many long and difficult years. Thank you for listening to the story till the end. Please support the channel with a like. It won't take much effort, but it means a lot to me. See you next time.